I am delighted to be here with Dr. Leonard Sax. Dr. Sax is a practicing family physician, psychologist, and a wonderful, prolific author whose books have had a big impact on my own thinking about lots of things, dealing with family, education, schools, etc. And I've wanted to talk to Dr. Sax for a long time, so I'm really delighted you're with us today.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
It's my joy. Before getting to your most recent book, I want to talk about the books I first read of yours some years ago. So Why Gender Matters and Boys Adrift, I think were the first two that I read. And a couple stories from those books that to me give an indication of the way you approached a lot of things. One was about a young kid that you were treating, huh? ADHD, he was heavily medicated for it, et cetera. But his dad was a hunter and knew a friend in Africa, also a hunter, and brought this kid who couldn't sit still for 30 seconds in an American classroom, heavily medicated for attention deficit disorder. But he's in Africa now being trained in hunting techniques that required him to sit still for hours in the brush, right, waiting for the animals, whatever it was. But the extraordinary thing, this kid that couldn't stop fidgeting, but when given a mission and given a sense of purpose, was able to accomplish something extraordinary. The other story that I remember, and I've conveyed many times, is the way a novel like The Lord of the Flies was taught in high school. I read that for the first time in high school, I remember. So most Americans know about it. And a standard way to do it is to say, well, look, how do all the characters in this famous novel feel? What's going through their minds and hearts? And that's a very legitimate thing to do. But you argued it might appeal more to the girls, where boys might start drifting off with that focus. But a teacher said, let's ask the boys to create a model of the island. So based on descriptions in the novel, to put together what this island is like. Something a little more external, more project-oriented, engage their minds. Now, I tell those two stories because I think they illustrate a basic point you often make, that gender does matter. It makes a difference. And this sort of gender-neutral approach to education and to child-rearing in general is really counterindicated. So I just appreciate those books very much and appreciated the contribution you made there.
Well, you've summed it up very well, that there's more than one way to teach the content. And if teachers don't understand that, you end up with boys who think creative writing is boring, that novels are boring. You end up with girls who think that computer coding is dull. And again, I've visited over 500 schools now over the last 24 years, and I've learned there's more than one way to teach it. And I can tell you about schools where boys who love video games and love football love Emily Dickinson, love Jane Eyre. I can tell you about schools where girls who love fashion design love computer coding. Right. If you understand those differences, you can break down the gender stereotypes, and you can broaden educational horizons for both girls and boys.
Yeah. You know what resonates with me very much? I came of age as a seminarian in the late 70s, 80s. Go back before the Vatican Council, let's say the 1940s, 1950s. The model was very much a West Point sort of model. It was a military model. It was based on discipline and a sense of purpose and mission. It shifted by my time, and it become much more of the let's sit together and share our feelings. I always found that difficult. I think most of my colleagues in the seminary found it difficult. When I read your book, I thought, it was a much more geared to a feminine approach. I think with John Paul II, who was kind of a heroic figure, and I think he planted in the minds and hearts, especially of young men, this sense of ecclesial mission. We've been sent. We have a task to do. And I find the seminarians now, respond much more to that, call it more masculine approach to spiritual formation.
Well, we actually have some fascinating brain research that bears on this. So Deborah Yergin-Todd and her colleagues at Harvard Medical School looked at brain function and brain activity in children, in young children. So what's going on in the brain of a 5, 6, 7-year-old when you read them a sad story or a scary story? The area of the brain that lights up is this little nucleus at the base of the brain called the amygdala. Well, the amygdala doesn't make any connection to the talking or analytical part of the brain. So if you ask a 5-year-old or 7-year-old, how did that story make you feel? How would you feel if you were the child in that story? The 5-year-old, the 7-year-old can't give you an articulate answer. And the brain research helps us to understand why. It's because the amygdala doesn't connect to the talking or analytical parts of the brain. But by the time a girl is 14, you see a very different pattern. The brain activity has moved out of the amygdala up into frontal, temporal, and parietal cortex, the same part of the brain where the talking, the analysis happens. So if you ask a 14-year-old girl, how'd that story make you feel? She can now give you a very analytical answer, a very articulate answer. Do we see a similar pattern of activity among the boys? No. In 14-year-old boys and 17-year-old boys, it remains stuck in the amygdala. Asking boys or even young men, how would you feel if you were in that situation? Doesn't work. And the brain research helps us to understand why it doesn't work, because it's just not wired that way.
Yeah.
What works for girls doesn't work well for boys. The brain research is helping us to understand why. The way to get boys motivated is different from the best way to get girls motivated.
Is it project-oriented? Give them something to do, a mission to accomplish?
Well, the word heroic
yeah.
is a good word.
Yeah.
That appeals to boys. Inspire boys with
Yeah.
stories of heroic men. And that will work. But having boys sit in a circle talking about how would you feel if doesn't work.
It doesn't work. And you know, that coheres very much with my own experience. I think you talk too about the way boys and girls will recreate. So for young girls, sitting together and talking and about their feelings and having a conversation, where boys can feel very much at home. You're with your buddy, but the two of you are together watching the game or together, and they feel connected, even though they're not sharing their feelings with each other, but like together they're focused on something extrinsic.
So Deborah Tannen and her colleagues have amassed a great deal of research showing that across all cultures, girls and women are face-to-face, literally. When they talk, they're looking at one another.
Yeah.
This is not true of boys and men. Boys and men are shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, okay.
They're looking out at the world together. She's got a great video where these two boys, one boy is going off into the corner of the room, and he's just talking to his friend. He's got his back to his friend, but they don't seem to mind. They keep on. A girl never does that. A girl never turns her back on her friend unless she's angry at her friend, but boys do it all the time. Girls and boys use language differently. And if we understand those differences, we'll be more effective, absolutely.
And a gender-neutral approach is going to be counterproductive for both boys and girls.
If you ignore gender, you end up reinforcing gender stereotypes. You end up with boys who think poetry is for girls and girls who think computer coding is for boys.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about the book Collapsing, The Collapse of Parenting. Because I think in the introduction, you play on that phrase, don't you? The boys adrift and, well, parents adrift. So what's happened to parents in our culture that they become kind of adrift in terms of their parental responsibilities?
Yeah. So in order for parenting to work, parents have to have some authority because the role of the parent is to instruct the child in what's right and wrong. And I go right back to Deuteronomy 6. You shall love the Lord your God and teach them diligently to your children. Well, that's Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 7. But, you know, I'm a student of biblical Hebrew. Veshinantam livanecha. That actually doesn't say teach them diligently. Veshinantam, it would be easy to say that in biblical Hebrew. The verb there would be lamed, but the verb there is not lamed. The verb is shanen. Shanen doesn't mean to teach. It means to chisel in stone. So a better translation of that phrase, Veshinantam livanecha, would be chisel these laws in the hearts of your children.
You know, we say, that's a very interesting, we say drill them into your children. That's the translation that I use. Drill them. But I didn't know the Hebrew precisely behind it.
The root there is shane, meaning tooth.
And it's following the Shema, right? Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is Lord alone. I mean, the central commandment of Israel. But then
So right alongside that, in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, I quote a longtime columnist for the New York Times, Jennifer Finney Boylan, who wrote a column on enlightened parenting, in which she asserts that enlightened parenting means, and I quote, setting your child free to discover for themselves their own right and wrong. And if in so doing your child becomes a stranger to you, then so be it, end quote. Now, that may seem enlightened to some, but it's not enlightened. If you set your kid loose to discover for themselves their own right and wrong, and they have a device with internet access, what they will discover is Lil Nas X and SZA and Cardi B and Megan Thee Stallion and mainstream pornography. It is a dereliction of duty. I mean, what is human childhood for? I mean, literally, a 4-year-old child has just begun. A 4-year-old horse is a mature adult, and a horse is a bigger animal than a human. So it can't just be
But
about
a 4-year-old human is not.
a human is maturing for more years than most animals live. Why? Why does it take so long? It can't just be about biological maturation, because as I said, a horse is fully mature at 4 years of age. Well, we don't have to guess. We have scholars like Dr. Melvin Konner at Emory, who's devoted his career to studying this question, wrote an 800-page tome, The Evolution of Childhood, Oxford University Press, comparing development in our species with development in other species, asking this question, why does it take so long? Why is development so many years in our species? And the answer the scholars give is that it takes so long because it takes so many years for parents to teach the child right and wrong. The New York Times recommendation to set your child loose to discover their own right and wrong is not only a dereliction of duty, it's profoundly unhuman. It's not what's in our DNA.
But it's so deep in the culture. I call it the culture of self-invention. And you see it in every movie, read in every book, it's in every song practically. It's up to me and my freedom to invent myself and to find my own values.
And that's what I'm getting at with the title, The Collapse of Parenting. I mean that instead of looking at scripture or even looking at the evidence, too many parents are looking at the New York Times, set your child loose to discover their own right and wrong, or listening to National Public Radio, which is sending very much the same message. Look to scripture, look to the evidence. I quote Diana Baumrind, who, the great pioneer of parenting research, who followed kids for 10, 20, 30 years and found that parents who were strict and loving, authoritative parents, those kids had the best outcomes. But before her death in 2018, she tried to sound the alert. She said, American parents have become confused. They think there's a tension between being strict and loving. They think you have to choose between
it's one or
being
the other,
strict
but in fact it's
or
both,
loving. And she tried to remind us the best parents are both strict and loving. So what I'm saying in the book is you've got to be that authoritative parent, both strict and loving. Look to the research. I've got a presentation for parents actually titled Evidence-Based Parenting, but it can also be titled Biblical Parenting, because it turns out that evidence-based parenting is biblical parenting. And what I mean by the collapse of parenting is that instead of looking to scripture or to the evidence, too many parents are looking to the New York Times or National Public Radio, which is not evidence-based, which is based on American culture. And American culture has become a toxic culture that undermines the authority of parents.
Yeah, and I mean, I see the effects of it every day, is when people imbibe the self-invention culture and just make it up as you go along, they're not happier. They're more anxious, they're more depressed, they're more lost. And it's that loss of authority, the questioning, the constant questioning of authority. And the chiseling is not happening, the drilling is not happening, and so people aren't being shaped. I remember years ago, this mother came into the sacristy of the church where I was, and she, presenting her son, who was about, I don't know, 9 or 10. I said, he'd like to serve Mass today. And I said, well, you know, we have kind of a program they have to go through for that. And she goes, well, what I've done with him, you know, I told him, I don't want to tell you what your religion is. I want you to come of age, and then you will decide your own religion. And I looked at, I didn't know her, you know, from Eve at that point, but I just said, would you accept that logic in regard to anything you think is important? You know, like playing a musical instrument or playing a sport or learning a language. Would you just say, no, off you go, and you figure it out and make up your own rules? No, I said, you bring that kid into the world of the language or the instrument or the game, you know. Here's a golf club. Go swing any way you want. You know, we accept the logic of, you got to drill things into kids in regard to anything we take seriously. But then when it comes to your own life, we say, no, don't worry about it. Just, you know, off you go. But I think you've detailed for us how much damage that's doing.
Yeah.
Psychologically.
Yeah. And in the new edition, I talk about gentle parenting, which really wasn't a thing 10 years ago. It's become very popular. And there are different definitions, but this notion that gentle parenting means letting kids decide.
Right.
And I show that's really, it's not biblical. And it's not wise. That authoritative parenting, both strict and loving parenting, parents need to find the confidence to be parents. And again, the people sometimes look at the title and they think I'm blaming parents. I'm not blaming parents. If I'm blaming anyone, I'm blaming American culture that has undermined the authority of parents, beginning with the Disney Channel. But the first chapter of the book is the culture of disrespect. And I talk about how American popular culture has become a culture of disrespect. And I explain what I mean by that and how parents need to mindfully and intentionally create a culture of respect in their own home.
And how on display that is in music and popular culture. And I found that one of the more shocking parts of your book when you kind of went through slogans on T-shirts and things we hear in the computer culture, and it's just dismissive toward parents. You know what I thought of as a biblical reference there was the beginning of Exodus, when there arose a Pharaoh in Egypt who knew not Joseph, meaning someone who'd forgotten what Joseph meant to Egypt. Joseph saved Egypt. Joseph was the key to the survival of the country. But time passed, and a Pharaoh came along who, I don't even remember that. I forgot about that. When you forget about authority, you forget about tradition, you forget about what shaped your culture, your family, you're lost, And that's that deep disrespect. Or think of, the commandment to honor your mother and father. It does mean, yes, your biological parents, but also the mothers and fathers of your culture and of your tradition. And we stop honoring them, we're in trouble. But the culture of disrespect has kicked in, hasn't it?
Yes. So I talk about Lil Nas X.
Right.
So this rap artist who had a huge hit in this country. And when I meet with kids, all the middle school kids, all the high school kids know this song, Old Town Road. And it was 12 weeks at #1 in the United States. Most popular song in this country. All the kids know it. Black, white, Spanish speaking, they all know it. And he sings, "You can't tell me nothing. Can't nobody tell me nothing." Last year the comedian Bill Maher had a huge hit with his book. And he said, one of the basic truths about the human experience is that young people are beautiful but stupid.
Yeah, right.
Old people are ugly but more likely to be wise.
Right.
So he said any successful human culture will connect the stupid but beautiful young people with the wise, ugly old people.
Right.
You can't tell me nothing.
Yeah.
Can't nobody tell me nothing. Breaks the bonds across generations.
There's the Pharaoh that knew not Joseph.
If you can't tell me nothing, why should I go to church? Why should I go to school? Why learn about the War of 1812? You can't tell me nothing.
No, I know.
Can't nobody tell me nothing. That's the culture of disrespect in a nutshell. You can't tell me nothing.
Yeah, and the kids are suffering from it,
And
aren't they?
the kids are suffering from it. So I tell parents, look, you've got to limit, govern, and guide your kids' exposure to this toxic culture. You don't want your kids listening to this stuff. And I'm very proud. My daughter doesn't listen to this stuff. She's a high school senior. She does not listen to this stuff. I have shared with her, look, there's a lot of good things in American popular culture. And my daughter knows Bruce Springsteen. She and I can sing Born to Run. She knows Singing in the Rain. She knows The Bandwagon. We sing those songs together.
Yeah.
There's a lot of great stuff in American popular culture. The songs you love, share those with your kids. And she's created a little subculture at her high school where these kids sing these songs. And share the good stuff with your kids. And don't let them get sucked into this toxic culture of disrespect.
So you and I are around the same age, and the TV shows when we were kids, still had a strong kind of moral sensibility about them. In the comedies, but they had a moral sense to them. I began to notice, maybe like 25 years ago, I like going to movies, You begin to notice in movies, not just the anti-hero, but it's this new sort of postmodern hero of complete self-invention, the voice of freedom. Again, don't tell me what to do. And finding your free voice became the great moral goal. And that movie, next movie, same story. Not someone finding the virtuous path, someone finding the heroic path of self-sacrifice. It wasn't that anymore. It was overcoming external constraint so that I can find my self-assertive voice.
Okay. Well, my brand is evidence-based. So we have studies where researchers have looked into this, and scholars UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles,
Yeah.
looked at the most popular TV shows targeting children and teens every 10 years from 1967 on to the present.
Yeah.
And they quantified the shows in terms of what is the show teaching, in terms of what is important on 16 parameters. Most popular TV show, 1967, The Andy Griffith Show. 1977, Happy Days.
Yeah.
1987, Family Ties. 1997, Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And they found great consistency, 1967 through 1997. Those are
Yeah.
very different shows.
Yeah, yeah.
But they found that all of those shows were teaching. The most important thing is to do the right thing.
Yeah, yeah.
To tell the truth, even if it hurts.
Even you're under pressure
to
from
be
others,
a
but you
good
do the
friend,
right thing.
even when
Yeah.
that's not easy.
Yeah.
Being famous was number 13, 14, or 15 out of 16.
Yeah.
But then in 10 years' time, between 1997 and 2007, it flipped upside down. And the most popular TV shows of 2007, like American Idol and Survivor, suddenly winning and being famous is number one.
Yeah, yeah.
Doing the right thing dropped to number 13. Doing the right thing, that's going to get you voted off the island. And they asked, why is that?
Yeah.
Why did American culture flip upside down in 10 years? And the answer they give is social media. Social media transformed American culture. Suddenly it was all about likes and followers. So you're absolutely right. American culture transformed in a very short period of time. American culture today is not the American culture of 30 years ago. Now it has become, in the words of the UCLA scholars, it has become a cult of fame. And
Yes.
that is, and I
Yeah.
talk about this in the Collapse of
Yeah.
Parenting, it's very toxic because if your kid buys into that, where the most important thing is to be famous and have 50 million followers, that's really toxic because your kid is not going to be famous. Is not going to have 50 million followers. And if they
Right.
buy into that scale of value, then they will regard themselves as a loser.
As losers,
and they
and
will be anxious
more
and depressed.
depressed and-
As Dr. Martin Luther King said, anyone can be great because anyone can serve. In the culture pre-1997, anyone can be great because anyone can serve. You know, there's an episode on the Andy Griffith Show where Aunt Bee's in the hardware store, and she's talking about how great this product is. And it just so happens the stranger she's talking to is the owner of the company that makes the product. And he says, Aunt Bee, I'm going to make you famous. You're going to become our national spokeswoman. I'm going
right.
to
I
fly you
remember that
around
episode.
on
Yeah.
our private
Yeah, yeah.
jet,
Right.
and you're going to be rich and famous. And the entire episode is devoted to her consideration of this offer,
Yeah.
which she rejects. She says, why do you want to be rich and famous? My place is here
Right.
in Mayberry. And it's quaint because you can't imagine anyone
different
today
culture. No,
making
right.
sense. But in
Right.
the context of the show, it makes sense because being rich and famous is not important.
You know, maybe at the end I want to talk more about religion explicitly, but I'm very intrigued by this because 67 through 97, there's kind of a golden thread, and then things begin to flip. And so social media, yes, indeed. But the other thing that started happening big time, right around that, late 90s, was the massive disaffiliation from the churches. So when I was a young kid, let's say the 1970s, 97% of our country had a religious affiliation. 97%. Only 3% of Americans would have said, I have no religion in 1973, let's say. Now, it's fully like 26% would say no religion. Among young people, it's 40%. It started and it moved very rapidly. Late 90s, early zeros is this great disaffiliation. I think those two things are correlated, don't you? The loss of religion as a bearer of the moral and spiritual tradition, and then you get the social media on top of that. That's a toxic combination, isn't it?
I don't think the UCLA researchers looked at that.
At religion, but
Yeah.
No, but it's, I mean, I see that all the time. I'm a big fan of The Simpsons, speaking of TV, and one thing that's very intriguing about The Simpsons is everyone goes to church. They'll have episodes where the entire town is at church on Sunday. Well, that was true when I was a kid. Again, 97%. And it was, we assumed our friends were going to church on Sunday. Catholic, Protestant, Jew, people were going to church. Now, I mean, who's going to church? In my diocese, right here, and this is pretty typical, it's about 21% of Catholics come to Mass on Sunday.
Wow.
Which is pathetic. It's pathetic. And I've launched a whole stint in my diocese to try to address that problem. But culturally, that's the case. The numbers have gone down dramatically. Pharaohs who know not Joseph, people that have lost a sense of the great spiritual and moral tradition. That's wreaking havoc, isn't it, in kids' lives?
You know, there's been a lot of buzz about John Haidt's book, The Anxious
Yeah.
Generation.
Yeah.
And he talks about this rise in anxiety and depression over the last 20 years, and he blames social media and smartphones.
Yeah.
But I wrote an essay for the Institute of Family Studies where I pointed out, and I'm not the first person to point this out, Derek Thompson pointed this out in the Atlantic magazine, that rise in anxiety and depression is mostly confined to the English-speaking world, that it's not observed in Eastern Europe. It's not true in Greece. It's not true in Russia. Kids in Greece and Russia are just as likely to have smartphones and social media. And we know this, but there has been no rise in anxiety and depression. In Greece, there has no rise in social media. There's been no rise in anxiety and depression in Russia. Now, I'm not holding up Russia as
Right.
a role model.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. But Greece and Russia are still Christian communities where people go to church.
Yeah.
We are not. So I think that may be evidence in support of your claim.
I think it makes a difference. It's been my intuition now over these years. Let's shift gears a little bit. Why are American kids so out of shape today? So we've been talking about this. I don't know if you've seen this, but it's gone around social media. This photograph from the 1970s. It was taken from a high position along a beach. I don't know where it was, but a beach. And it's old people, middle-aged people, young people, teenagers, kids, big. Nobody's fat. Nobody's heavy. And again, not just teenagers. I mean, this is a range of ages. And I remember that. I remember those days when I was a kid, and if someone was really obese, especially one of your peers, it was very unusual. Now, of course, it's a epidemic in our country.
So
Give me some of the
in my
reasons
book,
for
The
that.
Collapse of Parenting, I share those numbers. 50 years ago, 4% of American kids were obese.
Is that what it
Today,
was? Okay.
20%.
Yeah.
Just over 20% of American kids are obese, not merely overweight,
Not just overweight, but
obese.
yeah.
So what's driving that? There are multiple factors driving that, which I go into, but one of the factors is that today many parents let kids decide what's for supper.
Yeah.
And I give an example firsthand. I was speaking to parents in Chappaqua, New York. So this is an affluent suburb north of New York City. And I was speaking to parents, and a mother and father shared with me that they had made a healthy, nutritious supper for their son and daughter. And son or daughter came home and said, "Ooh, yuck, don't want to eat that. Can we just order pizza?" And so dad got out his phone, and daughter orders her personal pizza and with her favorite toppings, and son orders his
own,
personal
yeah.
pizza with his favorite toppings. And I said to Dad, "Why'd you do that? Why didn't you just tell them this is what's for supper?" And he said, "Well, I don't believe in using starvation as a means of discipline." I said, "They're not going to starve. Look, 50 years ago, if mom made a supper for her kids and the kids didn't want it, she didn't run out and buy them a pizza.
She'd say tough.
She would say, this
Yeah.
is what's for supper.
Right.
If you don't like it, you can go to bed hungry."
Yeah.
But today, many parents think good parenting means letting kids decide because they heard it on NPR or whatever. If you let 12-year-olds decide what's for supper, well, there are some 12-year-olds who will eat broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, cauliflower, spinach, asparagus, and kale. But there are many 12-year-olds who will insist on pizza, French fries, potato chips, and ice cream. And that is one factor among several that is driving this rise. Another is what kids are doing. Kids are choosing to spend their free time playing video games, looking at screens.
Yeah.
And one mom in my own practice told me, she said to her son, "Look, it's a beautiful day. Why don't you go outside?" He said, "Where would I plug in the PlayStation?" Again, parents need to be authoritative, need to turn off the screens. But again, in defense of the kids, it's a problem because, again, you and I are old enough to remember when you drive around a neighborhood 30 years ago, the kids would be outdoors.
Of course, you're right.
Today, you drive around a neighborhood and the streets
Yeah.
are empty. The kids are not outdoors.
My dominant memory of being a kid is my mother must have, made sure we looked roughly presentable, but then I would just get on a bicycle. I'd be on my bike all day long outside, maybe come home for lunch, go right back outside again, shoot baskets on the driveway, and I was constantly outside. TV, when I was a kid, and again, to be fair to young people today, there were so many. When I was a little kid, I had
3
4
stations,
channels or
yeah.
something. and you had to go clunk, 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 and change the TV. And if maybe the Cubs game was on that I found interesting, but if that wasn't on, I'm not going to watch television.
Love is a many-splendored thing.
Right, I'm not going to watch that when
Soap
I'm
operas.
10 years old. Right, but that sent us outside, you
Yes.
know. And to me, that's such a sad state of affairs when kids really don't even know what to do. Go out and play. Well, what do you mean? As you say, where am I going to plug in my my Xbox?
So this is another reason why parents do have
Yeah.
to take the initiative, turn off the screens, and push their kids to be active. So letting kids choose what's for supper and letting kids choose to play video games rather than being active, that's a big part of what's going on here.
The
And
obesity thing.
again,
Yeah.
parents failing to exercise authority is a big part of it.
What if a parent says, "Oh, I couldn't possibly. He's so addicted to the screen, and he'd go crazy." Would you? I mean, literally take the screen, put it away someplace. Yeah.
You have to do that. And both in my book, The Collapse of Parenting, and in my book, Boys Adrift, I provide evidence-based guidelines for limiting video games. We've got
Do you
very
find-
good research on this.
One of the saddest things, and I'll see it occasionally. Not even I see it a lot actually. You go to a restaurant, and there's a whole family there, and they're all on their separate devices. It's such a dreadfully
Breaks
sad.
my heart.
Yes, it's a dreadfully sad image. But you know, the freedom from screens. I'll tell you a story. In our seminary formation, we now have what's called a propedeutic year. So before you enter the seminary proper, you have to go through kind of a novitiate, right? And a major part of that is detoxing from social media. So we compel the guys to surrender all their devices. And at first, people said, "Oh, this is never going to work. They won't survive." It's the best part of it. And they all say it. It's the best part of this propedeutic year is they are getting free of the devices. But it is like detox. It is like getting over a drug. Something I've done this Lent. We're recording these words during the season of Lent, and we tend to give up something. I decided one day a week the phone goes in a drawer. So I've been doing that, and it's a little challenging, but not bad. I mean, I found it liberating. The phone, it's in the drawer. I know there are emergencies. I'm a bishop of a diocese. I got to make sure. But one day a week, I can live without it. But, heck, I've gotten addicted. We all have. I had my first cell phone when I was 45, but I'm addicted to the darn thing, too.
I meet with middle school kids and the high school kids, and when I meet with the kids, it's always a interactive conversation, and we talk about social media. And I share with them. I learned a lot from essay wrote Pastor Tim Keller wrote, 1 Corinthians 4. What does Paul have to say? I think Paul has some real insights there. He says, "You know what? I don't care what you think of me. I don't even care what I think of me. I don't even judge myself." The great danger of social media is it's all about comparisons. It sucks you into comparisons. You post something, and then you're immediately looking to see, how many likes did I get? Mm-hmm. How many likes did she get? Why her? Why not me?
Yeah.
It's really toxic. Leonard Sax, have chosen not to be on social media.
Yeah.
Because, for me, the 10th commandment is a real struggle. You shall not covet.
Yeah.
It's commanding a frame of mind. Why her? Why not me? I put so much work into that, and she didn't. Why her? Why not me? Social media for me is a temptation.
Yep.
Flee from temptation.
Yeah.
I don't do it.
No, there's a lot of wisdom to that, and we've talked a lot about boys, but especially girls. They suffer from this dynamic.
Yeah.
The comparisons going on in social media, and talk about that a little bit. So for girls especially, why that's a problem.
Well, we've got a lot of research on that.
Yeah.
And I have another book that's not here, The Girls on the Edge, that I also did. They did a second edition on because, back in 2010, the first edition, I warned that social media was destroying girls, and you don't want to let your daughters on it. And then they had me do a second edition. And so we've got all this research now showing that social media is much more toxic for girls than it is for boys. And why is that? Well, I think we now know the answer. Girls and boys use social media differently. Mm-hmm. So a boy and a girl both get sick, they both throw up. A boy posts his own vomit on social media. Girls never do that. A boy and a girl both go to a football game. They both take pictures of the game. But the boy is taking a picture of the game or the pretty cheerleader at the game. The girl's turning the phone on herself and taking photos of herself at the game. Here I am at the game, we had a great time. If you don't like the boy's photo of the cheerleader, he doesn't care. But if you don't like the girl's photo of herself, she's going to be hurt. Carol Dweck and her colleagues at Stanford found that girls are very ready to believe that other girls' lives are more interesting than their own life is, that other girls are having more fun than they are. Turns out, she found, boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is. So now imagine a girl, 12, 14, 16 years of age, in her bedroom, looking at all the other girls' Instagram. There's Emily at the football game, she's having a great time. There's Madison at the party, she's having a blast. There's Vanessa with her new puppy, isn't it cute? I'm just sitting there not doing anything. My life sucks. The more time girls spend on social media, the more likely they are to become anxious and depressed. That's a much bigger effect for girls than it is for boys. And we now understand several factors that drive that. First of all, girls are more invested in their social media. They post 5 times as many photos as boys do on average. And if you don't like Jake's photo of the pretty cheerleader, he doesn't care. But if you don't like Emily's photo of Emily, she's going to take it more personally. Boys post a much wider range of their lived experience. This boy looking at Jake's vomit is unlikely to want to be Jake, but girls are posting only the fun stuff, the happy stuff. And boys greatly overestimate how interesting their own life is to other people. So boys are to a considerable degree protected from the most toxic effects of social media. Girls are more vulnerable.
No, I get that. And I'm thinking, too, of the comparing the photographs. So, look how good she looks. Yeah, she took 100 photos.
Yes, and she chose the 2.
That was the one, you know. But that, is a very toxic psychological state of affairs, isn't it, if we get caught in that?
Boys are more vulnerable to the addictive properties of video games, which is a different issue.
To talk generally about screen time and depression, Jean Twenge, is it pronounced Twenge? That's how she says her name?
Yes.
I've read her for years, and she demonstrated that tight correlation between screen time and depression. And I feel that. I can feel like if I am, scrolling through social media, it's like, oh, come on.
Well, social media and depression, not video games. Video games don't cause depression, but social media does.
So social media, for all the reasons you've been talking about.
Yes. So, Jean Twenge is the key researcher there, and she has shown, especially for girls, the more time you're on social media, the more likely you are to become anxious and depressed. And again, there are a couple factors driving that. You're looking at all the other kids, and they're having such a great life. My life sucks, and they got all these likes, and I didn't. But again, video games does not drive depression.
And that drives addiction?
Drive depression. So boys may spend 20 hours a week playing video games. They're not depressed. They're having a great time.
But they're getting addicted, though, right?
They may be getting addicted. Their parents are getting depressed, but they are not.
Of course, I see that all the time with the young boys. And that story you tell in this book about the kid who was great at the video football game, right? And then it was his dad said, why don't you try real football?
Yes.
And the poor kid had grown kind of chubby and overweight, out of shape, and he goes out for the team, and the first day the coach goes, no, you're not up to it. I have no
idea whether you can play this game because you're so out of shape. I expect
come
you here
back
tomorrow morning.
5 o'clock in the morning, and let's run.
And we'll see if we can get you in shape, and the boy did not return.
I won't do it. He'd rather be star of the virtual football than be actually playing football. And accepting the difficulty and challenge of it.
Unfortunately, that is happening a lot.
And man, I think of my own childhood and entering into sports and various activities, and that's just par for the course. I mean, you're never great at something in the beginning. You've always got to go through.
Well, and it illustrates a bigger problem, which is that a growing proportion of young people are privileging the virtual world over the real world.
I know,
That if I'm the star in the virtual world, what do I care about the real world? And why should I put in the time and effort that it's going to take to become an actual football player if I'm already champion of my league in the virtual world?
Oh, it's so sad, Because it's an ersatz world. It's a fake world. It's a virtual. You say,
Well, those are the terms that you and I use.
Right, yeah.
But it recalls, so parents insisted that their son come in to talk to me. And I said, yeah, okay, tell me about yourself. He said, I'm level 120. Do you have any idea what that means? I said, yeah, I believe that's a reference to World of Warcraft. It means you've reached level 120 at World of Warcraft. He says, it means I'm the best there is. There is nothing beyond level 120. I'm guild master. Do you know what that means? I said, yeah, I think that's another reference to World of Warcraft. It means you're master of a guild in World of Warcraft. He says, I'll tell you what it means. It means there's people in Johannesburg, South Africa, in Liverpool, England, in Jakarta, who bowed down to me because of what I've accomplished. I said, yeah, but in the real world, your parents told me you're living in the basement, you don't have a job. He said, okay, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that accomplishment in the meat world means more than accomplishment in World of Warcraft.
The meat world.
I said, okay, if by the meat world you mean the real world, yeah, I think that's a fair statement of my position. Okay, this was not a productive conversation.
That is very interesting.
He is perfectly happy.
Yeah.
I'm a family physician and a PhD psychologist. As near as I can tell, this boy's perfectly happy with his 55-inch flat screen and his 5.1 surround sound and his 200-watt subwoofer. He told me that in another game, when a mortar round lands near, the system is so powerful that books will fall off the bookshelf. He's having a great time. He is perfectly happy. His parents are pulling their hair out. His father said, how's he going to survive when we're gone? He has no skills.
Yeah.
But he's very happy with his pornography and his World of Warcraft.
Let's talk about pornography a bit, because anyone dealing with young people, and now not just young people, but probably anybody who's grown up with the internet, right, knows how prevalent, how dangerous, how destructive it is. I find occasionally if I'm preaching and I'll mention pornography, just the word pornography, suddenly the whole room goes silent. Because it's so widespread, and everyone knows deep down how destructive it is and how soul killing it is. Talk about that a bit. I mean, it worries me immensely. I honestly thank God every day I didn't grow up with the internet, because what's the age now? Kids are getting addicted like by 11 or 12 or something.
They're seeing it at a very young age, and again, many parents don't understand that any kid with a phone can access this.
Right.
You don't need a credit card. You don't need to prove your age. And it is different. This is not Playboy. This is violent. And it is really harmful. And again, schools have hired me now to speak to the boys about this. And I show them the research. And I show them how kids who are looking at this, they become dissatisfied with actual partners, that they become less effective sexually with active partners, much more likely to have erectile dysfunction, because if you have spent years at 14, 16, 18 years of age masturbating over pornography, and now at 22 years of age you're with an actual woman who doesn't look like a porn star, the salami is not going to salute. It's not. This is true, and we've got lots of research on this, and the boys are fascinated. The
But
boys
there's
are
that real
really
world
interested.
versus virtual world.
Yeah, you're training your system in a way you don't want to train your system. It's really harmful. But then at a Catholic school, I will tell the boys, look, Galatians 6, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. What a man sows, that also will he reap. If a man sows to please the flesh, from the flesh he will reap destruction. If a man sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit he will reap eternal life. Look, the teaching of the church is very clear on this point. And then I also speak to the parents, and I say, look, you must install a parental monitoring app on your kid's phone. Look, a Catholic school, a Catholic boys' school did something very courageous. They surveyed all the parents, and they asked the parents, how often does your son look at porn? Never, once a month, once a week, more than once a week. 90% of the parents, more than 90% of the parents said never. Then they surveyed the boys and said, how often do you look at porn? Never, once a month, more than once a week, more than once a week. More than 90% of the boys said more than once a week.
Of course,
The parents
But
have
the
no
parents-
idea.
yeah.
Where are you looking at the porn? On your phone.
Your phone.
What proportion of the parents had installed any kind of parental monitoring app? 4%. You must install a parental monitoring app on your kids' every device with access, and say to your kids, look, this is my job as your parent. I don't want you looking at at this stuff, because this is your job as a parent. And parents are skeptical. They'll be like, "Oh, come on,
Say,
my
I
kids
can't do it, or it won't work, or
they won't." The
Yeah.
most common answer the parents will give me is, "It won't work."
Yeah.
My kid's just going to Google, "How do I get around
Right.
Net Nanny?" Well, I've spoken to employees at Net Nanny, and there are many apps out there. I just mentioned Net Nanny, and the people at Net Nanny told me that Net Nanny has employees whose full-time job is to Google the phrase, "How do I get around parental controls on Net Nanny?" And if they found that a kid has found a hole, they patch it. Parents are saying that as an excuse because they're reluctant to exercise their authority. You've got to install parental monitoring app on every device your kid has. And parents, I want you to take the device from your kid at 9 o'clock at night, the very latest, and put it in the charger, which is in your parents' bedroom, which is from now on is going to be in the parents' bedroom. Your kid can have it back tomorrow morning, because your kid should not have a device in the
devices out
bedroom,
of the bedroom,
overnight.
huh?
No
Yeah.
devices in the bedroom overnight. And parents will push back. And I warn the parent. I say, look, when you get home tonight, when I'm speaking to parents, I say, when you get home tonight and you tell your kid, look, Dr. Sax says I should take your device. They're gonna protest. They're gonna say I use it as my alarm clock. Let them know they still make actual alarm clocks. You can go to the store and buy one.
Yeah.
And now they say, but what if there's an emergency? Let them know you still have your phone. If there's a true emergency, they can call you on your phone and you'll pick up. Look, this decision whether or not to have a device in the bedroom, it's not appropriate to put that choice in the lap of your 14-year-old. What's your kid supposed to say tomorrow in school when her friend says, hey, I texted you last night at midnight. How come you didn't answer? Is your daughter supposed to say, well, researchers have found that sleep deprivation in adolescence is a major risk factor in the etiology of both anxiety and depression? That's ridiculous. You can't expect a 14-year-old to talk that way. You have to allow them to say, hey, my evil parents take my phone every night at 9. We'll have it back to the next morning. This has to be your call. So I was speaking at a Catholic school, and I was doing this talking to the parents. And during question and answer, a father said, Dr. Sax, I hear what you're saying about the importance of kids getting a good night's sleep and not being interrupted. But, taking the phone, that just seems very controlling and intrusive. And so my daughter puts her phone in airplane mode overnight, so she won't be distracted during the night. And then, she does use her phone as her alarm clock. And then at 6 a.m., her alarm goes off. And then she takes it out of airplane mode. I think that's okay. I don't need to take her phone. And I said, well, how do you know that she leaves her phone in airplane mode? How do you know she doesn't take it out of airplane mode at 2 a.m, see what's going on? And Father was clearly offended. He said, Dr. Sax, you're suggesting my daughter would lie to me. My daughter would never lie to me. I said, sir, I don't know you and I don't know your daughter. But I can tell you based on the research, your daughter is more likely to lie to you than to anyone else. I said, look, there's great wisdom in the Lord's Prayer. Jesus said, lead us not into temptation. He could have said, make us strong to resist temptation. He didn't say that because Jesus knew the human heart. And he knew that if you lead us into temptation, we will fall.
Yeah, right.
Don't put that stumbling block in your kid's path. No devices in the bedroom overnight. No cell phone in the bedroom overnight. That's not just my recommendation. Those are the official guidelines of the American Academy of Pediatrics. And they got together.
But parents have to enforce it.
Parents have to enforce that. And again, that's what this book is about.
Yeah.
The collapse of parenting. In my own practice, a kid was diagnosed with ADHD, off the chart, inattentive, not paying attention in any class, and child psychiatrist prescribed Vyvanse, which was immensely helpful. But now a girl has palpitations and loss of appetite and jittery, and parents saw something I wrote for the New York Times about the dangers of these medications, and they brought her to me for a second opinion, and it turns out she's on TikTok until 2 a.m, and I said to the parents, you got to take your phone.
Yeah.
You got to take your phone. And Mom said, oh, I can't take your phone. She'd totally freak out. That's what I mean by the collapse of parenting. A parent who is uncomfortable exercising authority. You have to, and the result is kids who are, this girl doesn't have ADHD, she's sleep deprived. Sleep deprivation perfectly mimics ADHD of the inattentive variety.
They need a lot of sleep.
Vyvanse,
right?
9 hours.
Yeah.
Vyvanse immensely effective. What's Vyvanse? It's amphetamines. It's speed. Vyvanse, Adderall, tremendously helpful because it's compensating for the sleep deprivation. But the appropriate remedy for sleep deprivation is sleep, not Schedule II amphetamines.
Well, you talk about the medicalization of misbehavior,
Yes,
right? That's
exactly.
one of the problems in our society.
Yes.
And we medicate kids for all these issues when it could
Yes.
be a matter of behavior modification or the exercise of proper
Parents
authority.
failing to exercise their authority.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about safetyism, the cult of safetyism. I see that all over the place, and again, compare it to my own childhood, my dear parents, they were concerned about our safety, but heck, we just set off, bikes without helmets, and there wasn't the preoccupation with, I could get hurt. And we all got hurt. I mean, I fell off my bike and was knocked down and got into fights all the time when I was a kid. But there is now this, as you say, cult of safetyism.
Yeah, Greg Lukianoff and John Haidt wrote about what they called the cult of safetyism, which in one sentence means if any kid might get hurt, then no child's allowed to do it.
Yeah.
So this had led systematically to the elimination of dodgeball. I can tell you that American schools...
My favorite game when I was a kid was dodgeball.
Dodgeball is now eliminated. They are removing jungle gyms from American playgrounds because if any kid might get hurt, no kid's allowed to do it. And I really push back against this because kids need these activities in order to become strong.
Right.
And I'm telling you, I practice what I preach. My daughter fell off the jungle gym when she was 8 years old. And when I do this presentation, I show a picture of her in the cast, which I applied, the fiberglass cast I put on, and she's admiring the cast. She fell off the jungle gym. She broke her wrist, non-displaced fracture of the distal radius. I applied the cast. She did fine. These are the injuries. And in my own practice, mom brought her daughter in, elementary school kid, fell, puffy ankle, x-ray shows, we have x-ray in our facility, and x-ray shows fracture of the distal fibula. I said, yeah, she did break her ankle. She's going to need to see the orthopedist. And mom is furious. She's like, I'm not paying all this money, send my kid to a private school to break her ankle. I said, Mom, if your kid gets through elementary school and never breaks her ankle, never scrapes her knee, that is a deprived childhood. These are the activities that kids need to become strong. And so many parents now think it's their job to protect their kids from any injury, from any discomfort, mental or physical. They are mistaken. Kids need the right kind of stress, disappointment, failure in order to become strong. And this is an insight parents used to have, which many parents today no longer have. And they need to understand that failure and the willingness to fail is the key to success.
It's so hard though if your goal is to be famous and your goal is this, I'm the star of social media. Well, then failure, disappointment doesn't fit that model at all.
Well, this gets back to the point I'm making that American culture has become a toxic culture, that we need to return to those core Christian truths, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, that anybody can be great because anybody can serve, that God lifts up the humble. And I have a chapter about the virtue of humility. And again, I'm not just preaching here. Again, my brand is evidence-based, and we have good research showing that the child who is most humble, and we know how to measure this, the child who's most humble at age 15 is the adult who's most likely to be happy and content at age 25. Whereas the kid with bloated self-esteem at age 15 is the adult who's most likely to be resentful and frustrated at age 25. So you want to teach humility. And what does that mean? And again, I was at a Catholic school talking to they asked me to do a homily. I chose Micah chapter 6. And I explained to the kids, in the 6th chapter of Micah, the prophet is saying, what does the Lord require of you? You got to dot the I's and cross the T's? No. Here's what the Lord requires. Do
justice.
To do justice,
love mercy,
love kindness, and walk humbly with your God. So I said to the kids, these are middle school kids, I said, walk humbly with your God. Well, what does that mean? Humility. I said to the kids, raise your hand if you think you know what the word humility means. So Wade raises his hand and he says, humility means trying to convince yourself you're dumb when you know you're smart.
No, on the contrary.
I said,
on the contrary.
no, that's not humility. That is psychosis. That's a detachment from reality. I said, try this on. Humility means being as interested in other people as you are in yourself. And this is a Catholic school with verses from Scripture chiseled into the walls. But the kids are giving me a blank look. They've received no instruction. And I don't blame them. How should they know if they have received no instruction? I was at another Catholic school talking to parents about the virtue of humility, how humility at age 15 predicts happiness and contentment at 25 years of age. But during question and answer, a mom says, I don't want to teach my daughter to be humble. I'm sorry, that's just about the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I want my daughter to have high self-esteem, so when that big job opportunity comes along, she'll go for it. I don't want to teach my daughter to be humble. I said, Mom, with all due respect, you are confused. You're confusing being humble with being timid. Those are not the same things. They're very nearly opposite. And the virtue you want for your daughter in that situation, when the big job opportunity comes along, the virtue you want for your daughter is not high self-esteem. The virtue you want for your daughter is courage. Courage means you know your inadequacies and your failures and your shortcomings, and you find the strength to move forward.
But you face the challenge anyway. You know, that I think is really wise stuff, and we're getting out to solutions. We've been naming the problem different ways. I think you're dead right about that. Look, in our spiritual tradition, this is Augustine, it's Bernard, it's John of the Cross, when they say, what are the three most basic virtues? The answer is humilitas, humilitas, et humilitas. And what it means, and you're suggesting correctly, is not, self-reproach or I'm nobody. Humble means I've broken free of the black hole of my self-regard that draws the whole world into me. I break free of that so I can be immersed in reality. So Aquinas says humilitas veritas, right? Humility is truth. I get out of this self-preoccupation into the world. So I'm lost in the wonder of the simplest thing. That's the humble person, right? So to walk humbly with your God is break free of self-preoccupation, and now the world of value opens up to you. Under the aegis of the supreme value, the summum bonum, we call God, right? So now I can launch my life into that great adventure. That's humility. And so you're absolutely right. And all these things that are militating against humility and are drawing us more and more into this. That's why there's whole selfie, culture, that whole gesture of looking back at
Social
myself.
Media. Well, this ties back into your comments earlier about social media. Social media is anti-humility. And this is not a guess. When scholars study how American teens use social media, it's all about me.
Right.
Here I am at the mall. Here I am with my friends. It's all about broadcasting the self. And it is the anti-humility. I mean, conceivably, you could use social media to talk about the plight of the homeless, but that's not how American teens are actually using it. And this, again, is why I advise parents, no social media for teens.
Yeah, and again, that's our move with these young seminarians. It's like, boop, no social media. We're taking the phones completely away from you. But it's a detox thing. It's getting free of an addiction, isn't it? Hey, talk about Aristotle a bit. We have that in common. I was trained as a philosopher by a great Aristotelian, and he loved especially Aristotle's moral teaching. And so this idea of virtue that comes through habituation. Aristotle says, do the right thing, even when you don't fully understand it or you don't fully do it. Do it. And by practicing through habituation, you grow in virtue. And then virtue becomes this habit in you. And so it now becomes easy to do the right thing as opposed to a constant struggle. So most of us are, he calls it incontinence, meaning that you're always struggling against the good. You do it, but you struggle. The virtuous person, through habituation, says, now I easily do the right thing. That's pretty good, and that's ancient wisdom, and you're urging it on people today, huh?
Yeah, and this comes to another big theme of the collapse of parenting, which is that you want to make virtue habitual. Because a lot of parents think that good parenting means trying to persuade your kid to do the right thing. And I think something that we do learn from Aristotle is that virtue means that doing the right thing becomes a habit. So you want to insist on your kids doing the right thing so that virtuous behavior becomes a habit of doing the right thing. and that may mean compelling virtuous behavior. And that's very contrary to our current zeitgeist, if you like, which is that, do your own thing. If it feels good, do it, whatever floats your boat, which I think is really toxic, incidentally. I do think that parents need to be strict and loving and insist that kids do the right thing. And I think that, as C.S. Lewis, following Aristotle, said, sometimes the best way to acquire virtue that you don't possess is to say, well, what would I do if I had that virtue?
That's right.
And then
just
go
act
and
as though
do
you
it.
had the virtue.
Behave as if you had the virtue.
Right.
And then you will acquire the virtue.
Yeah, and that's as old as the hills, but we're forgetting that message, though, aren't we? Hey, let's just say we're coming to the end of our time, but let's talk a bit about the gender ideology, because in some ways, I think a lot of what we've talked about comes to a sort of sharp focus around that issue. When we are saying, indeed, in our culture, a 6, 7, 8-year-old child can say, I know I was born a girl, but I'm really deep down a boy, and so it's my decision and I want to do that. I live in a state here that's a sanctuary state, meaning you can bring a kid from outside of Minnesota, bring them here, and they can have, against their parents' will, they can have the gender transition surgery and all that. To my mind, this is one of the sickest things in our culture right now. And as I say, it kind of gives expression to a lot of what we've been talking about. I know you've been involved both kind of theoretically and practically in some of these fights. So say a bit about that.
Yeah. So Montgomery County, Maryland, a very large school district just outside of Washington, D.C., launched a inclusivity program where children 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 years of age were read books and instructed by their teachers, books like Trinity's Rainbow, about a boy who reinvents himself as a girl, or another book about a girl who reinvents herself as a boy. These are both prepubescent kids. And there was no opt-out. And a group of parents, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, said, look, in our faith, if God has made you a boy, a 5-year-old does not have authority
It's not
to
up to you
reinvent
to
themselves
decide
as a
otherwise.
girl.
Yeah.
That is not within the child's authority to do. And our First Amendment right of free exercise of religion is being compromised by the school, which is basically teaching a different religious doctrine. We want our kids to opt out. The district refused. They sued. They lost. They appealed to the federal district court. They lost again.
Yeah.
They appealed to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case, which they will hear on April 22nd. And the attorneys representing these parents, the Beckett Group, reached out to me and asked me to write a friend of the court brief, which I did with a group called the Manhattan Institute. And in our friend of the court brief, we pointed out that it's really harmful I don't even think we used the word harmful. We said it matters. It has consequences. What kids hear, you are normalizing transgender identity when you read these books to children, and that the parents are quite right, that kids are not born knowing what's right and wrong. And when you read them, read a 4-year-old a book about a boy, born a boy, who becomes a girl, and hold this up as normal and normative, that's going to influence. And in our brief, we point out that, look, in 1994, the American Psychiatric Association said, look, transgender is so rare, it's hard to estimate, but we think it's 1 in 30,000 men and 1 in 100,000 women. Last year in our own country, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, a large and comprehensive survey of high school students, 3.3% of American high school students said they are transgender.
It's absurd.
So we went from
It's
1 in
absurd.
30,000 in 1994 to more than 3 in 100 last year.
It's a
That's
social
a
contagion. It's
change
not
of 2 orders of magnitude in 30 years' time. So yeah, it matters what kids are taught. The culture has become a toxic culture.
And we're making them so much unhappier in that process.
Well, and we now have good research. So in Denmark, they have national health insurance.
Yeah.
And so we know everything about the health outcomes of every Dane. We know that transgender Danes are 7 times more likely to attempt suicide, 3 times more likely to commit suicide than Danes who are not transgender. We know that transgender Danes are more likely to twice as likely to die prematurely. Look, if a biological male takes female hormones, that individual is twice as likely to die, twice as likely to get blood clots, twice as likely to get strokes. Look, Denmark is very friendly to transgender people, but that doesn't change the biological reality. But I have been at schools where, look, Lola became Noah, and the school had a celebration, a school-wide celebration, and rewarded this individual with the role of Professor Harold Hill in the music band. Isn't this great? Lola's become Noah. Why are we doing this? Why are we celebrating transgenderism when we know that it greatly increases the risk of death, depression, and suicide? We should not be doing this. And parents, you need to be on your guard. If your kid's attending a public school, you need to know what the school is doing and prayerfully consider maybe it's time to move your kid to a Catholic school. Because this is widespread. I can tell you, I visited a great many schools. You need to know what's going on. Because this is really toxic.
Well, God bless you for speaking out about it, because I think it really is one of the most dangerous aspects right now of our culture. Listen, I could talk to you all day. We're out of time. Can you close, though? Could you say that lovely Micah quote in Hebrew again?
Asot mishpat va'avat chesed v'hatznei lechet im Elohecha.
I'm going to end with that. There's no better way, I think, to sum up really the message you've been giving us, which is getting over this culture of self-invention and its various manifestations, and learning again, to reverence these great values that come ultimately from the Lord God and should be chiseled deep into our hearts. So thank you for your great witness over the years, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks for inviting me.